in order to calculate the statistics that we're going to be working with today, first off, we need to open up the add-in, the analysis toolpack add-in to Excel. And it is spelled wrong, in my opinion, with the PAK versus CK, but the way you get there is you go to your Start menu, go to Excel Options, and then you'll select the add-in section. I'm going to do this in Excel. I just wanted to show you this slide so that you had it for your records because it is a little confusing, and the one thing that tends to be missed is that you have to hit the Go button in order to actually get that add-in to be implemented. Next on the list here is running the actual add-in. Is all you need to do is go to your Data menu in Excel and select the Data Analysis option. And that will bring up a lot of what we're going to talk about. And let me just show you quickly what we were going to do with that add-in. First off, I wanted to run a descriptive statistics, and that's something that you can very quickly run. We'll be doing an example, and by highlighting a set of numbers and putting in that input range, we can basically create a summary stat, which is over on the right bottom hand side there of that slide. And the two numbers that I highlighted there are ones that I look at quite a bit, is the mean and the standard deviation, which are the two that we're going to be using for our purposes. And I should also note the other statistics that are in there, such as the minimum, the maximum, the range, which is the difference between the minimum and maximum, the sum, the count, the value of the top 10 of smallest and largest. And also we have the median, which is kind of that middle point, and the mode. And the median's kind of interesting, so that if you sorted a group of numbers and went to 9950 in your number set, that would actually be the middle point of that data. And again, everything above that would make up half of the count of that data, and everything below it would make up the other half of the count. And the median, or excuse me, the mode is the most occurring value, and if we did any sort of summary for Benford's law, that's basically what ends up showing up as the top value. So, in this quick analysis, it's very quick to run, and within a second or two, you can learn quite a bit about your data. And a lot of times, I suggest running this even if you think you know your data, like you've gotten this data over time and time again. It does make a lot of sense to run these stats just to make sure you're looking at the right numbers. And we're also going to show how pivot tables can provide a lot of this information, and actually all you do is just add columns to the pivot table, and as you add those columns to it, you're able to change what the value is. So if you want to change it to the max by enterer or the minimum by enterer, or whatever, you can quickly and easily do that. And the last thing we're going to do in this section is stratify the data, but instead of stratifying it more on just standard limits, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 that we might be used to, I'm actually going to stratify on the standard deviation and the average, or the median, or excuse me, the mean, and then the standard deviation +1, +2, and we'll talk more about that. But what's nice about that is when you think about standard deviation, and I'll just jump over to Wikipedia here. Standard deviation is that measure of the variability to that mean, to that average. And in what you'll see is, most cases, +1 to -1 standard deviation, it makes up about 68.2% of that population. And then if you add on to that the second standard deviation, positive and negative, you're getting up to about 96.5 or so percent, and then anything else is within the third standard deviation, and then it goes from there. But I'm just going out to the second standard deviation, just trying to keep it where we're not looking for the ultimate strange type of anomalies, but for things that are still very much above average, and for that population do not again, work towards that mean. They work very far away from that mean, and because of that, and because really all data has some normal distribution to it that we're bell curve like we're showing here. Uh, it's just a matter of how variable it is to that mean, and how much it becomes wider or thinner to that mean. And again, we'll show some examples of this as well. But I like to look at this because this can really drive the outliers that we are trying to get at within that data set, and to use statistics to get us there. So it's not just a gut feel and a judgment call, but now you're using math to support what you're doing. So jumping into Excel, I wanted to first talk about setting up that add-in. And again, you go to Excel options, and I believe I've already set mine up though, so it will be kind of in this active applications, but it would be in the inactive applications, as an example, financial symbol. The only thing that you need to, in this case I'm selecting this one, but normally I would select the analysis tool pack. That is the one that you want to get. But make sure you hit the go button, because if you don't do that, it's not going to move forward and install that. And once it's installed, let me highlight these numbers here, but let's kind of, once it's installed, we're going to go to the data menu and then the data analysis section. And there really are quite a bit of tools here. I mean, I'm just using one or two in this session, but again, we'll go to Descriptive Statistics. That's the one we're going to go for. And in the input range, I'm going to highlight my information. I guess I could do it with a header row here. So I highlighted everything there. And then I said labels in the first row, so that provides me the labels. I tend to select everything. Confidence level for mean, the K largest, K smallest, and in this case I put 10. So it's going to summarize and give me a total for the 10 largest, 10 smallest. You're more than welcome to make that larger if you really wanted to try to find maybe the significant population. Maybe you look at the top 100 out of 5,000, and that probably would make up almost 80% of the value, is what you usually find. But again, these are just some of the things that you can select. We're just going to hit OK, and this will bring us to this descriptive statistic page. Now, I already set one of these up here, so I'm going to delete that. I already set one up here, and we just tried to start kind of moving forward into some of the other work that we're going to be talking about. But again, the mean, all of this information, the median, the mode, standard deviation, all of this we went over, and actually it's the same numbers, which makes it easier as well. And I did something off to the right here, and I did this for a few reasons, but what we have is, first off, say an average, which is basically that mean right there. And I actually just got rid of my decimal places, but that's in there. And what I then did was add some formulas that said, okay, let's add one standard deviation to that, and then let's add two standard deviations, and then let's minus one, and let's minus two. And again, we're going to be using this when we do a stratification of this information. And what we can do right now, though, is I want to talk about how we can get these other statistics into a pivot table first before we go to actually stratifying. So with that said, I have two pivot tables that I've set up here, but I'm going to go back to my payables data over here and just reset that pivot table. So I'm going to say insert pivot table, and it does highlight the data pretty well. You might want to just check that you've gotten everything in your data, and then by selecting the OK button, you have the opportunity to start adding fields to your pivot table, such as the vendor number, in this case as an example. I might make it a little bit easier and select the enterer. So there's only about 4 or 5 of these, so it's a lot easier to see. We're then going to select the invoice amount and drag that down to the summary of values. And I'm not going to worry about any sort of columns right now so much. I'm just going to, such as say an invoice date where we put the year here and we have kind of, the amounts per year. While that sort of trend is very interesting and something you can easily do in a pivot table, just trying to keep this more at the statistic level for today. And what I can do is this is a sum on the invoice amount. Well, let me drag that down again. And by going to my value field settings, which is right here, value field settings, and there are other ways to get there, but this I find is one of the easier ways to actually get to it. Going to value field settings, I can actually change that to count. So as opposed to it being a sum, it is now a count. So now we've added that, and we can bring it down again. And now that I have, I'm just going to select the value field settings for that field. And again, you could select max in this case, min, etc. There's various options here. Let me just take a look at all of them here. The max, the min, the standard deviation, some variances. We can also go to show values as, and this is what I more or less wanted to do, and say we wanted to say percentage of, percentage of the column. And we're just going to, in this case, take the summary, and we're just going to say the sum of invoice amount percentage by column. How does that rack up? And you're able to see here, just maybe formatting this quickly here for you, you can see where some of the larger balances are showing up based on enterer at this point. And again, we can keep adding. Now, what I've done, just to delete this one, is over to the right, I've already done this for you, and we've set up these pivots where we have not only the sum and the percentage of that sum, but also the count, the max, the min, the average, and the standard deviation. And in this case, this is by enterer as opposed to, say, in totality, like we talked about before, for the entire population. You could actually now start to say, well, let me take a look at this 976 times 2 plus 278. We're up to about maybe $2,100 or so, maybe $2,500. But notice that we actually have a payment of $14,728 as a max in this population. So that's weird, and it does bring up, that is one item that's completely outside of all of the standard deviations that we're looking at. The 96.5% chance that it's in there, we basically blew that chance and have exceeded it by, in this case, about 7 times more than that plus standard deviation or plus 2 standard deviation. I will say, if you want to work with these values, probably the best thing to do is just highlight somewhere in the pivot. And you probably could right click and say select all, but it's hard to show this, but you say Control Shift and then the number 8 key on an English keyboard, and that will give you a star or a multiply symbol. And by doing that, it highlights everything in your pivot table automatically. So it's, again, Control Shift star brings you that, and then we can copy that, and we can create a new sheet where we can paste that data, but you just have to be a little careful. If you paste it normally, it will paste like a full pivot table. However, if I say paste values, I will then just get the values. And I would suggest working with data in this way because it does make it a lot easier to then, let's say in this case, take the average and plus 1 standard deviation, and then you could add more to that. But this just makes it a lot easier to work with. So definitely, if you're going to work with some of these stats, I would do so more so outside of the pivot table, because it is difficult to work then over here and start referencing things within the pivot table itself. It just gets a little hairy to deal with within Excel. Now, I've also created a vendor pivot as well. And actually, a lot of these pivots are really easy to create. And let me just note this. If we did want to create, say, a vendor pivot and have it separate from the enterer pivot, we can just do a mover copy just by right-clicking the tab and mover copy, create copy. And with that copied item, we could put it over here, sorry, just to keep it organized. And we can call this a vendor pivot test or something like that. And by selecting the actual pivot table, one thing we could do is deselect the enter. I like to actually put in that new field first and then drag out the old field. I have noticed as times when you get rid of the rows, it can take away some of the columns and mix up the data. So as just a general rule, I tend to kind of add the field and then take out the old one that I had. But now we have a vendor pivot test, and again, we can do this in multiple ways. And one of the things that you might want to even do is select other fields, such as things like the day of the week, as an example, that we've added. Actually, sorry about that. We want to bring that down here into here, and then take out the vendor item. And now you could get those statistics, say, by day of week. You could do it by, say, check date, if you want to put the date in there and look for certain days that are completely out of line, etc. So, I mean, there's many options here. I wanted to show you a few. And in the sample data that you will get, you will have the enterer pivot and the vendor pivot created for you. So one last thing that I wanted to do is to talk about a stratification. And I ended up getting this idea from Charlie Walker with Top Cats, who's an Excel add-in, but this concept really just uses the VLOOKUP concept. And this is a function within Excel. And let's just take a look at this function and just kind of look at the arguments here. So what I've done is we took the descriptive statistics that we had before, and we put to that some titles. So minus 2 standard deviations to 1 standard deviation is this negative 11,862, etc. And the one thing that I wanted to note is this $1 million one. And the $1 million one, excuse me one sec, is actually kind of the lowest limit that you want to set in your stratification. So it'd be almost like a minimum within that file. And what's really nice, even though I set it at 1 million, you can get that minimum from the descriptive statistics that we calculated. So that was something that you can put in that minimum. What that'll do is, and now let's talk about VLOOKUP in relation to this table, and I keep kind of goofing up here by selecting items. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up this value here, 265799, and I'm going to look in this table array, Q6 to R11, and in that table array I'm going to write the column 2, which is over here, and instead of putting false, I'm going to put true. Normally you put false here if you want to get an exact match. But if you want to get a close match, the way that Excel will do this is it'll actually go up to this item here. So if I have an amount, let me take a simple one here, say from 827 to 7172. Let me just close that. 827 to 7172, which is where 2657 lands. What the VLOOKUP table will do is it'll go through this lookup table, which again is sorted in order, and I believe you need to have this sorted in order for this to work. And it'll go to that first number that it finds, and then it'll kind of write in that number until it reaches that next mark. And if it's over 7172, it will continue. And when it's over 13517, it'll actually write over 2 standard deviations. Now the reason we put the negative million in there is really just to be some limit below. Otherwise, if I don't have this in here, and I'll delete that just for a second here. When I go to my VLOOKUP stratification, if I filter that, just from a filter point of view, you're going to notice, I believe, some NAs coming in. And let's take a look at those NAs. So by looking at the NAs, what you can figure out is that they are far below, I think it was $11,000 or so. So let me just get rid of that filter. Bear with me one second and go back in. And so because it was below that 11,862 credit, it didn't know what to write. It didn't have that limit to work from, so it just puts an NA. And so what you want to do is put $1 million in there, and that'll clean it up for you. So this type of stratification, the reason I did it with the standard deviation is because we want to see what items are below 2 standard deviations and above 2 standard deviations. Which you can do very simply. I mean, you can filter, just like we did before, going to the data menu and selecting filter, and just selecting the items below. Excuse me, actually, I want to clear all of this, and then just select these two below and over. And then that will give you the 59 out of 4,821 items that are below the two standard deviations or above it. And, as you see, they're all quite large items in relation to the average. And the average, again, was that $827. And again, very statistical way of quickly isolating who the larger ones are, but also, just to really say, hey, we're using math to calculate it. Just as one last thought is I created a pivot table that you'll have in here. It's pretty easy to do. You just kind of put that VLOOKUP stratification as the rows, and I did a count. And I did that really just to kind of say, how do my percentages rack up to what we saw in Wikipedia? And, Wikipedia at least tells me it's for one standard deviation, 68%, then 95.6. And now that you actually look at this data, when you start adding up actually the average to one standard deviation and one standard deviation to two standard deviation, you start to find that yes, like at least 95, even more than 95% is showing up there. And that means that it is one of these more, I believe, narrow standard deviation bell curves that we're working with here. Because it is something where there's a lot more, the numbers are closer to that average or closer to that mean that we're working from. So again, just wanted to show you that full circle and show you that in our data as well, and a way to then extract that. Another way to get to the details, did want to note this, is the below or above. You can just double click on the 8 there and it'll bring up those 8 items that you can take a look at. As well. So that is another way of getting to the details, but all of these spreadsheets are in the Excel sample data that you will be receiving.